of the inflation looks like, and one of the key commodities, and this is how the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics listed them in the Q3. We have the food and non-alcoholic beverages, which surged by 9%. We have transportation, so prices, especially for public service vehicles, went up by 8.10%. We have housing, water, electricity, gas, and other fuels, which went up by 6.24%. Now remember, these are critical issues when it comes to households, and they have played a critical part when it comes to contributing to inflation or the persistent rise in the cost of living. Of course, now I am joined by Churchill Ogutu. He is an economist and he is familiar with the numbers from the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. Welcome to Business Cafe, Churchill.
Thank you, Brenda.
Churchill, when you look at the 5.7% that was registered in December 2021, it's still within the Central Bank of Kenya target, which is 2.5% to 7.5%. But at the same time, we still have consumers on the ground who are still complaining that commodity prices are still going up.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at the numbers that were given, what you said at 5.7% for the month of December, it's a more or less an average basket of all the commodities for an Kenyan consumer. But if you go to the specifics, for instance, if you find that the high income earners in Nairobi, you find that their main component perhaps could be transport as opposed to food, whereas for the low income earners in Nairobi, the higher component of their commodities that they consume is on food as opposed to transport. So you find that each person that you ask, you'll find that there are different answers. But now if you get to the average, 5.7% might be for an average consumer, but if you get to the specifics, you find that the pinch is on everyone. They are feeling it.
So they are complaining about the basic commodities. Bread, when you look at 2020 December, it has gone up by at least 3 shillings. Tomatoes has also gone up, of course, because of the drought situation in the northern parts of the country. What's an outlook basis? Because we've seen the rains come in, but they're still well below the target.
If you look at the inflation as a metric, it's on a year-on-year comparison. For instance, that December numbers that you saw, the 5.7%, it's comparing it to December 2020. So if you look at the outlook for 2021, we'll be comparing this year as compared to last year. Of course, there are a number of factors that will come into play. One of them is how will be the global oil prices continue, and what will be the spillover impact to the fuel prices. So that is a major factor. We're still having that bill at least to reduce the prices of fuel. It still hasn't passed parliament, but if it comes down, we could see that even the prices of fuel will be more or less moderated, and that will at least put a pedal on the uptick of fuel, and that will at least reduce the cost of some of the basic commodities. Absent that, we'll see an upward spike in inflation for the better part of this year, 2022.
Churchill, just hold that thought, and of course I'll give you more details in relation to the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics Q3 performance. And here are just some of the key numbers in relation to that specific period, comparing it to December 2020. We're talking about key sectors that have been performing relatively well, and they have since improved tremendously compared to the previous period. So we've seen the gross domestic product. Of course, this is the highlight, which went up by 9.9%. Of course, this is attributed to the fact that a lot of COVID restrictions were eased during the period, and this contributed to a lot of economic activity within the country. Manufacturing as well surged by 9.5%. A lot of commodities being produced within the period, including face masks and other key sectors such as protective gear due to the COVID-19 situation. We also seen education, which went up by a significant 64.7%. This right here was the best performing sector. Remember, the children were away because of the COVID-19 situation, and now they're back in their classes. As you saw earlier on in my report, we have parents who are paying school fees up to 4 or 5 times within the year. So this is contributing to the surge in activities in that specific sector. Transportation and storage storage up 13%, accommodation as well 24.8%. Another key sector to watch, because accommodation is as well linked to hotel capacity, which surged within the period, attributed to the fact that now hotels are getting more visitors in relation, of course, to the COVID situation being eased. We also have financial and insurance activities up 6.7%. Another key area to watch, because of the elections, we're seeing a lot of activity in terms of political risks, and also key sectors as well, which are also insuring their products. Agriculture, forestry and fishing down 1.8%. This, of course, was the bad side when it came to the data and the numbers. Agriculture is a key contributor to the economy, but it was not performing relatively well because of the drought situation in the northern parts of the country. Churchill Ogutu is still with us, and thank you for staying with us here at Business Cafe. When you're looking at the key sectors and their performance, we have to talk about the education sector, because it seems like it is the stellar performer of the period, Q3.
Actually, as I stated earlier on, these numbers is compared to a similar period but a year before. So the numbers that you saw for education up 65% in the third quarter. For last year, it was against third quarter in the year 2020. So if you get to the year 2020, the third quarter, of course, most of the schools hadn't resumed. And then you could see that because of that, and then when we came to third quarter last year, we saw that schools had resumed. So, and what happened in the previous year, they did a methodology whereby they discounted a significant chunk of education, which led to even the contraction that we saw overall in the year 2020. So that wasn't there in the year 2021. So that's where we're seeing these outsized numbers. Not only in the third quarter of last year, but also in the second quarter of last year, education was the stellar performance, but it's just because of the resumption of education activities in schools.
Manufacturing sector, it didn't do very well as expected, but we're seeing increased activity in relation to that. On an outlook basis, how do you see it performing going forward?
Which particular sector?
When you're looking at the manufacturing sector, it performed relatively well, but not at its best.
Yeah.
What are some of the key activities that will sort of generate more activities going into this year?
Yes, looking at the manufacturing sector, I think the biggest driver to that was production of food or agro-food processing, which I think grew by 6.3%. That's a subsector in the overall manufacturing sector. But having said that, remember that this is the sunset year for the manufacturing sector, at least to have a 15% contribution to the overall GDP. But where are we as at the end of the third quarter? I think the manufacturing sector was still at 7.5% as the overall contribution to the GDP. So it's still punching below its weight. But having said that, I still feel that we'll still continue with the food processing, which will drive the manufacturing activities in the better part of this year, as opposed to the non-food processing, which I think will still have it a bit rough based on the slowdown in investments because of the political risk as we get into. So I'm still seeing that the food processing will anchor the growth in the manufacturing sector this year.
And staying with that point, even as we wind up the discussion, Churchill, which one is your biggest risk? Is it the fact that we are having elections this year? Is it the drought situation that could affect food production within the country? Or you're seeing another potential risk that could affect the economy when you're going into this specific year?
To me, the two biggest risks, one is now the mutations of the variant, COVID variants. We saw Omicron came around December. I think yesterday I saw news that there's a new variant coming up that could even be more lethal than Omicron. So it's just keeping an eye on that. So around COVID-19 issues is still a developing story. So that is the biggest risk. We can't really say that it has been really smoothened out. The other risk we know is now political risk. But I know that from the context that we have elections in the second Tuesday of August, that's there. But now the uncertainty around that political event, that is a major risk that even policymakers, people who are in the market are keeping an eye on. And last but not least is now the drought impact. Agriculture, though not having an outsized contribution, it's just contributes 20% of the overall GDP. But having said that, it has a spillover effect into some other sectors, even manufacturing. So that, to me, is also another key risk to look at in the course of this year.
Churchill Ogutu, always a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you for making time for us here at Business Cafe. George, what else are we watching? iPhone?
Very well. So the iPhone maker's value, that is Apple's value, crossed the $3 trillion mark. The iPhone maker's value tripled since 2018 as its sales continued to soar, and of course we have seen a continued, purchase in their products, and it spent hundreds of billions of dollars on its own stock. The Apple, the computer company that started in California in 1976, is now worth $3 trillion. It became the first publicly traded company to ever reach the figure on Monday, when its stock briefly eclipsed to 182.86 USD a share before closing at 182.01. Apple's value is even more remarkable considering how rapid its recent ascent has been. In August 2018, for example, Apple became the first American company ever to be worth 1 trillion USD. An achievement that it took 42 years. It surged past the 2 trillion mark in 2 years later. Its next trillion took just 16 months and 15 days. How is that, Brenda?
It's very good, but you know me, so long as the phone can access internet, it can type, it can do the basics, I'm good with that. Not really on the high end. But on Apple is doing extremely well, of course, looking at the automation of vehicles and also the introduction of new products.
Just to put it out there too, $3 trillion translates to 100 times our annual budget. So if iPhone was to liquidate everything they own, they would fund us for 100 years. But on to another interesting one. You know Sony as the home electronics and appliances maker, coupled with a few more. Well, now there is more. Sony has pivoted into cars with Sony Mobility and a Vision SUV prototype at CES 2022. During Sony's keynote presentation at CES 2022, the company rolled out the Vision EV, and here is how the unit looks like. Very well. Brenda, you want to do an EV one day?
Well, I'm not sure whether that will work on our roads first, because the matatus will be... the matatus will make sure that, they give you some kind of character developments on the road.
And today we were twinning, Brenda. Today we were twinning.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.